Just in, a major economic figure has walked out of a key international economic discussion. Mark Carney, former central banker, former prime minister, now a leading voice on global economic risk, left a major trade forum earlier this week. Observers are calling it a dramatic shift. But we're not here for theatrics. We're here for facts. Carney's departure is not a stunt. It's a signal. We'll get into exactly what that means, how it ties to sweeping tariff policies in the United States, and why economists and labor markets around the world are now warning of serious job risks, not just in the U.S., but globally. But first, if you're tracking how trade policy affects jobs, markets, inflation, and your own life, make sure you subscribe now, like this video, and turn on alerts. This story is not finished, and it's moving fast. Let's start with the context. Since 2025, the U.S. has imposed a wide array of new tariffs on imported goods from dozens of countries. These tariffs vary in level, from a minimum of around 10% to steeper reciprocal rates of over 50% on certain categories of imports, including steel and aluminum, vehicles, and other industrial goods. These changes have reshaped global trade dynamics. According to research from J.P. Morgan, the average effective tariff rate worldwide has climbed significantly, surging from around 10% to more than 23% with the latest policies. J.P. Morgan economists warn that these tariffs could raise consumer prices by 1 to 1.5% over the current year, potentially reducing real disposable income and slowing consumer spending growth. In plain language, tariffs act like a tax on imports that the American public and companies ultimately feel through higher costs and slower economic growth. Now let's connect that bigger picture to jobs. When tariffs raise the cost of imported materials and equipment that U.S. manufacturers rely on, companies face tough choices. They can absorb higher costs, they can pass them along to consumers, or they can reduce spending, including hiring, wages, and investment. Data from economic analysis shows that overall job growth in the U.S. has weakened in recent months, with lower than expected job creation and a slight uptick in the unemployment rate. Employment data revealed that employers added far fewer jobs than projected, months with job gains well below forecasts, as businesses hesitate in the face of tariff-driven costs and uncertainty. Now consider this. Higher costs and trade retaliation also hit industries that export goods. Export-dependent sectors, from agriculture and automotive parts to machinery, face shrinking demand as foreign countries impose their own tariffs in response. In South Africa, for example, economists and labor leaders have warned that U.S. tariffs could put up to 100,000 jobs at risk, especially in agriculture and auto sectors, where exports have slumped dramatically since the tariffs were imposed. This is part of a broader pattern. When one country raises trade barriers, others often respond. Tariff escalation rarely stays contained, and that sets the stage for the job risk estimates we're hearing now. Analysts and experts have suggested that tariff conflicts between major trading partners could put hundreds of thousands of jobs at risk in the United States alone. One widely discussed projection, not yet official government data, but cited in multiple international analyses, suggests that as many as 420,000 U.S. jobs could be jeopardized if tariff escalation continues and retaliation intensifies. Those projections come from economic modeling that looks at job exposure across sectors tied to trade and supply chains. It's important to note that these numbers represent risk exposure. They are not predictions of layoffs tomorrow, but they show the scale of jobs whose economic viability is vulnerable under prolonged trade conflict. Now back to Mark Carney. Carney's walkout took place in an environment of growing trade tensions at international forums where economic leaders are increasingly vocal about the unintended consequences of expanded tariff measures. In his widely watched 2026 address at the World Economic Forum in Davos, he explicitly criticized erratic shifts in trade policy, warning that unpredictable tariff swings and aggressive protectionist measures were creating a rupture in the global economic order. Carney's speech called for cooperation among middle powers and smaller economies as a counterbalance to disruptive shifts in U.S. policy, and positioned the tariff situation as a systemic issue, not a temporary policy disagreement. Observers noted that his remarks signaled a clear frustration with how tariff policy was being pursued, a frustration shared by other world leaders and economic officials. This is not occurring in isolation. In Canada, one of the United States' largest trading partners, tariffs have already contributed to a significant trade deficit in key sectors. Canada's automotive exports to the U.S. collapsed after hefty tariffs were applied, contributing to a record monthly trade imbalance. As exports shrink, companies scale back production, and that, in turn, affects jobs. Beyond Canada, other nations are watching closely. South African trade unions, agricultural groups, and economic analysts argue that sweeping tariff policies could devastate their jobs and revenue if market access continues to shrink, and global economic research highlights broader risk. Academic modeling published late last year found that widespread tariff escalation could lead to tens of millions of lost jobs worldwide in the worst scenarios, with low-skilled workers bearing the brunt of the impact. These global trends ripple back to the U.S. economy. Investors looking at heightened policy uncertainty, slower trade growth, and rising costs have pulled back on expansion plans. Uncertainty is one of the biggest job dampeners. Companies are far less likely to hire or invest when they can't forecast future costs and markets. Now let's talk about inflation and consumer impact. Tariffs effectively act as a tax on imports. When businesses pay more for inputs, those costs often are passed down the chain to employees, consumers, and ultimately the prices we pay at the store. Financial research firms estimate that tariff measures could boost overall consumer price growth by a noticeable margin, compounding inflation pressures. That's another stress point for households already facing rising living costs. In one survey of frontline workers and employees, more than half said tariff-driven uncertainty was making them worried about job security and potential layoffs, concerns that extend well beyond manufacturing into service and office sectors as well. Labor markets do not operate in a vacuum. Worker anxiety can translate into reduced consumption, delayed hiring, and decreased productivity, all of which feed back into slower economic activity. In some forecasts, analysts are worried enough that they see a meaningful risk of a broader economic slowdown or recession if trade conflict continues. Major banking research has indicated that the odds of a recession in the United States have risen significantly due to tariff-induced uncertainty and slowing consumer demand. Consider this. A recession is not just a statistic. It's a period when businesses cut back, hiring stalls, investment dries up, and job insecurity becomes widespread. And that feeds back into the very employment risks Carney and others are now raising publicly. All of this brings us back to the significance of Carney's walkout. When a seasoned global economic leader chooses to step away from negotiations rather than stay and try to influence policy, it indicates that the cost-benefit balance has shifted. It suggests that the policymakers involved are no longer weighing economic outcomes, but are instead doubling down on a strategy that many experts believe is counterproductive. That's why this moment is so consequential. It's not about one personality, it's about a policy trajectory that has wide-ranging implications. Jobs, trade, prices, global economic growth, and long-term investment. And because trade policies are set at the highest levels of government, their effects trickle down through every stratum of the economy, from multinational corporations to individual workers. As this situation continues to unfold, we will be watching for follow-on developments. Revisions in GDP forecasts, updated jobs reports, supply chain adjustments, and international shifts in trading alliances. We'll also track what Carney and other officials say in their next public remarks. This is not a static story. This is a dynamic situation that affects real jobs, real businesses, and real families. And here's the key takeaway. Tariffs are not just a number in a policy speech. They are a force multiplier, affecting prices, jobs, investment, and confidence. When global economic leaders start speaking loudly and walking out, that tells us something important. This issue has moved beyond debate. It has become a defining economic flashpoint of our time. We will keep you updated as this story develops. Thank you for standing with us for deep, fact-based coverage. If you want continued updates, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join the conversation. Tell us in the comments, are tariffs protecting jobs or putting them at risk? We'll bring you more as it happens.